Okay, I do these obligatory reviews where I join a group and I'm supposed to read four books, and then four other people read the book I've offered, and then we review them. And this is on Goodreads, and it's in sync with so far with Amazon's rules about reviews. But so sometimes you and the book aren't a perfect match, because it's this group thing. It isn't a book I've picked out because I think, ooh, this looks good. It's been assigned to me by the people managing that group. And it works. And I mean, I can read almost anything and get into it. And I think with the way the groups are set up, you can sort of avoid anything really unacceptable, you know. So that works. But these are all other writers. And I find that just about all my reviews now come from other writers. And the reviews I write are often of indie authors' books that I've read, or at least I know them through the blogosphere. And the reviews have become, how you hear about you want an honest review? It's really hard to either get or give an honest review anymore because sometimes, you don't really like the book, but because it isn't a stranger, it's someone you're acquainted with, you have to kind of watch it. And a lot of people get out of this by saying, if I can't give it 4 or 5 stars, I just won't review. But if you're obligated to, you have to do it. And so I've asked myself the question, am I giving this book less of an honest review because I know the author or because I know they're a struggling indie author like me? And I think sometimes I do. And that's not really good because it means the reviews we write aren't really pure. So it just gets complicated once you're in that kind of scenario. And I'm sure this was the case often. Like I think back to authors of the past, in the 19th century, where they all knew each other and they were part of each other's literary circle. And you'd hear about these feuds that started up because someone wrote a nasty review that was actually meant to be nasty. And I kind of think, in a way, that's sort of neat that we're replicating this online, but in another way, it's awkward. So that's kind of what I had to say.
There's a famous.
Well,
I was just gonna say, there's a letter where H.P. Lovecraft is complaining because one of his author friends has raked one of his stories over the coals, and he's like, "Well, I don't think it was that bad." And he's written to his friend arguing with him about his review of it. So yes, I see that sort of thing in the modern day as well, and I think it's sort of amusing.
Yeah,
Sorry about
it
that.
is
Go ahead, Richard.
cool. Actually, about HPL, I just thought I'd add this before I sort of draw a bit. He carried on mostly by letter. That's how he communicated to people. He didn't go to conference. I don't think there were any writer conferences then, but he didn't kind of mix and mingle too much. He did it by letter, and that reminds me a lot of blogging because it's sort of you have these discussions, but they're kind of slow mo, like over a couple of days instead of immediate, like face to face. So and through the mail, it would have been weeks probably. So it's kind of like there's everything's new, but nothing's new, right?
Yep.
well, I understand the dilemma because I've run into it myself. The problem is when I look at what I'm reviewing, if it's an indie author, I realize that the weight of a review is going to be a lot more than, say, if I reviewed something from, I just read a book by Stephen King and decided to post an online review. Stephen King can, his publication can deal with a lot of negative reviews because there are going to be a ton of good ones. And you talk about hundreds of reviews rather than just maybe 1 to 8 when a book first comes out. So, I feel very uncomfortable, and this has happened to me when I have to read something and I really don't like it. Maybe that's some story, but actually the way it's been written. And I would prefer, I think, maybe we need to start saying when someone who is a self-published author comes to you to say, well, look, I'll be happy to read it and review it, but if, like you said, now you're stuck because you're in a group that does. But if I feel like if I don't feel it's a 3, 4, 5, especially a 4 or 5 for I'm not going to post it. I'd rather tell you why I didn't like it. I'd rather do it personally, and say, oh, so they know it's actually not personal. It's like, here's why I didn't like it, and this is what I think could be improved or not. And I think we spoke a little bit about that last time, because I know I would look forward to another author telling you so you can improve it, but I honestly wouldn't want that put out in public when you're writing on, because some of it is subjective, that some of it though isn't. So in your case though, I would avoid getting in those situations. I couldn't imagine, being in that. It would be so uncomfortable.
Well, actually, I'm thinking back to my working days. When I was, well, years ago, I worked for an academic library, and we have a collegial system, like people like there is in academia generally, professors. So you'd be on a committee,
Right.
and somebody's performance would be being discussed, whether they should get a merit increase or even be promoted to the next level. And every year we had to write evaluations of people. So you got really good at weasel words.
Yeah.
Weasel words. That's what it's all about. So if you have to write a review and it's not, you're not really that happy about the book, you think it's got problems, there are ways to say it.
Right.
that are considerate and sort of accurate if the person reading it knows about weasel words.
Well, you highlight the positives, right? Yeah, you highlight the positives and the strong points, and you just maybe a little more quiet about the negatives. So,
or couch them in terms that aren't, and it's not an opportunity to be nasty. And I know even in this collegial system, people would carry on vendettas and they would run other people down in a way that seemed gratuitously harsh. And maybe they would excuse that by saying, well, I'm just being honest, and people have to know the truth about themselves. And you could, if you just substitute book there instead of person or their track record or whatever, it's the same thing. So yeah, there are ways to do it. But what I'm saying is that it's not easy. You can't just read a book and say, oh, I thought it was great, I like this, or I thought it was a piece of because the characters were all cardboard, like you can when you're just a reader and you don't have any other role there. But when you do, you have to kind of think about it. It becomes work. It's like work. It reminded me of work.
Yeah, exactly. I do always enjoy and prefer when you spontaneously, like, you read something, like someone either on Twitter or someone posts something and you read it, you go, wow, this is really good. Then it feels good to be able to get that voice out to help them out. Yeah. It's just it's just that other way around. Someone says, could you please read this and post a review? I got to learn to say, I'll read it and then I'll tell you.
Yeah. I'll give you a review privately first.
Yeah, and I personally would even prefer that too.
So I generally think I'm like you, Richard, in terms of posting reviews like on Amazon or Goodreads. I generally limit myself to doing that for indie authors because they're the ones that need it. Like you said, Stephen King doesn't care about my review, and whether I liked it or not, it's not going to have an ounce of impact on his success or failures. And I mean, Audrey, you mentioned you try, you don't, I don't know if you said this about you personally or just some people say this, but you don't want to post a review unless, you're willing to give it 4 or 5 stars. At first I disagreed with that, but then I thought, well, when it does come to indie authors, again, going back to the Stephen King example, a negative review isn't going to hurt him. So I've written incredibly negative things about Stephen King over the last 5 or 10 years, because I just feel like he's become this author who keeps writing the same story over and over again. And he has to at least write 800 pages every time he does that story. But anyway, what I've done though a few times, and I hope that this is true, is sometimes I read an indie author and there are things that drive me crazy, like a lot of typos or things like that. And I believe, and this is the part I hope is true, without naming the author, without naming the book, I've used that experience to write about it on my blog. And just kind of say, if you're a self-published author, if you're an indie author and you're putting out stuff that's filled with typos or poorly edited or just isn't a very good story, this isn't helping anybody. And so I've done that a few times. The other thing that I find interesting about reviews is that for some reason, Carrie Rubin is now blocked from posting reviews of my books under her name or under her original Amazon account or something. And so there's all these algorithms, and for whatever reason, Amazon decided that we're friends somewhere, which we've never met. We just know each other through blogging. And she tried to post a review on something and they absolutely wouldn't let her do it. Meanwhile, people who have the exact same last name as me, because they're related to me, post reviews and Amazon doesn't do anything with them.
Well, I had a funny experience recently where I was doing one of my Goodreads review group reviews. And apart from what I thought about the book, the blurb, the description of the book described one of the characters as an asshole, right? That's what it said right there. And
in the blurb, yeah.
He calls himself that all the time in the book. And so when I wrote my review, I mentioned this. And right away, or a couple minutes later after posting, they said, "Thank you for your review." And then I get this email that said, "This, we can't, unfortunately, this doesn't live up to our community standards and we can't." So I kind of wondered about it. And I thought, is it the $50? Because I'd spent more than $50 there and all this other stuff. And then I realized it had to be that word, an a-hole word, even though it was in the book's description, even though it was in the book. So I waited for about a week or so, because you never know how these algorithms work, right? And then I rewrote the review, took out that word, posted it, and it went through fine. So it could be something like that, but they don't spell it out for you. They kind of make you work at it.
Actually,
Yeah.
go ahead, Bertha.
It reminds me of a funny story. In one of my books, there's a dog whose name is Sergeant Dumbass. And when somebody wrote a review of that and mentioned the character, their review got blocked for using that.
Exactly.
So you can write a book and put it up on Amazon with bad language, but you can't write a review that refers to the bad language in the book.
Not explicitly.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, I guess we could go on about reviews for hours, but
Can I go back to one point quickly, Mark? When you mentioned Amazon having that rule about friends, etc., do you know that is my pet peeve? I understand why they do it, but that's the general rule for all products. They want to get rid of people who are just like pushing products. I bought this thing and they're all fake reviews. But we get hit, and let's face it. If you are a famous published author, what your editing, your publishing house does is goes out to other authors and say, "Please read this," and they put it on the back, and they say, so
Great point.
author supporting authors should be the exception. They should, Amazon's, and AI should look and say, "Is this another author?" And if so, push it up because another author thinks this is good, and we're going to sell more copies.
Anybody who has been doing this for a while noticed that it's harder and harder to get reviews?
Yes.
Not so far, not me. I don't get many, but I still keep getting them every so often.
It seems like it's about as same as it ever was, I think. I've been doing it about 5 years. Seems roughly the same.
Okay.
My impression is the only reviews I get now are from other authors. And sometimes there are these Goodreads review groups, which are sort of a guaranteed thing. But other times it's just, people from the blogosphere. But I don't get very many reviews just from total strangers that kind of, buy the book, read. And yet the book's been picked up, or the books collectively do get picked up when I offer them for free or on sale, or even just people buy them, But I think people have a hard time writing reviews anymore. They're too busy, or they think a review has to be really long or something.
Yeah, I have the same experience. Most of the reviews are from fellow writers. There are a few friends and family members who might post a review, and then every once in a while I get a review from someone I have absolutely no idea who it is, and those are the reviews that feel the best.
Mhm. As long as-
Even if it's not super positive, it's still it's like, wow, someone who doesn't know me
Mhm.
Yeah,
picked up my
that's,
book and read it.
I would say, and I don't I have to go look at the exact numbers, but I would say maybe 1 in every 30 books I sell, probably there might be one review. And of those, probably 1 in 10, maybe they'll actually write something.
Yeah.
It's a little tougher to tell on Amazon because they switched from a number to a percentage system. So if you get 3 reviews that don't change your statistics very much, you wouldn't even know. I
Right,
mean,
right,
there's
right.
it'll say X number of reviews, so that tells you. But then when you go to look, you have no idea if they didn't write something, whether it was a 5 or 4 or 3 or whatever, if you have enough in those columns. But it does seem, I would say, and I would say I have to say, maybe I'm unfortunate, but of the reviews I've had, maybe 75% from people I did not know or
Okay.
just had met on Twitter or something. So
Right.
really don't know.
Yeah.
You know.
Who wishes Amazon and Goodreads would let us do ratings from 1 to 10 rather than 1 to 5?
Oh, I'd go with that. Yeah. I'm always thinking, 3.5.
So
Awesome.
if it's an indie author and I wish I could give them 4.5, I'll give them 5.
Mhm.
If it's not an indie author, if it's a Stephen King or whatever, and it's between a 3 and a 4, I'll go with a 3.
Mhm.
I would prefer, well, I would actually prefer that numeric rating systems be abolished completely.
Yeah,
I don't like those, but yes, 10 would be better than 5.
yeah,
I'm a little torn because I do know from doing interview design when I was in survey design when I was way back in grad school, but that it's actually better to go with the smaller scale
Hmm.
for some reason. But logistically, the way they publish those numbers are by 0.5 scales, right? 4.5. So they're doing a 10-point scale, but just in a way
Right.
that isn't very obvious. So yeah, I would then say
yeah,
move to a 10-point. So instead of 4.5, you get even 9.
yeah,
Makes difference.
yeah. The other thing, somebody mentioned, people don't have the time or know how to write reviews. I come across that from friends and family, and it's like there's no art to it. You say how many stars you think it was worth, and then you just say something. What did you think of the book? There's nothing that requires on Amazon or Goodreads that you post a literary, well-written, cohesive review. You just write what you feel like writing.
Especially if they've just told you, I really liked your book. I thought the whatever was really good. And,
Yeah.
you just say that.
That's all you need to say.
3 words even. It was good.
Yeah, exactly.
Just, rate it and say something.
Yeah. So do you ever respond to any of your reviewers?
No, no.
Only,
I would usually say like, thank you for reading it. Or
Yeah, that's about it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, on
Especially-
Goodreads, you can like people's reviews, and I think I've done that a few times.
Yeah.
But no one here has been an author behaving badly.
No. No, not after I read that whole thing that was years ago. It was about some woman who wrote a book called I think it was called The Greek Seaman. Right? Anyway,
Yeah,
so
I can see where this is going.
yeah, well, it wasn't even that. It was kind of like, I guess it was one of those typical indie books that got rushed into publication without a thorough check of grammar and spelling and all that. And some blogger somewhere, this was when things were a lot more, there weren't as many books around and there weren't as many indie authors and everything. And so it was kind of like Wild West and things would get noticed more. Anyway, some blogger wrote quite a critical review and pointed out all these problems and stuff. And this lady just went ballistic and pitched into him and carried on and on. And then, of course, a whole lot of other people piled in on different social media.
Yeah.
So it became like a thing. And sort of after reading that, I thought this is definitely the way not to do it. So I've never even though, if somebody, I think some review that's sort of ignorant, like where you can tell the person hasn't really read the book closely and they're saying stuff, and I'd just be itching to point out, obviously you missed the X, Y, and Z, but I just don't do it.
Yeah.
I just figure
Yeah.
it's not worth it.
Yeah. I think I've written on my blog in response to some reviews, and I think the one that happened last year was I submitted a book to a contest, and they actually, in letting me know that I wasn't going anywhere in the contest, they provided a copy of the reader's review of my book, and I posted about it on my blog. And part of my post related to, okay, well, they said this and this, they clearly didn't read through the entire book then. And that's the thing that bothers me is a negative review is fine, but if in your negative comments you reveal that you didn't actually read the book, that bothers me. So
yeah, that's true. Yeah. Or if they actually out and out say that. Like I think I got a 2-star review for something once where the person said, I quit at 27% because I thought it was too slow or something. And okay, that was basically their review with a few more enlargements on that. And I thought, well, why do you even bother? See, that's the kind of thing I think where if you can't give it more than 2 stars, then maybe you shouldn't even bother. And if there was something really specific, you contact the author and say,
yeah.
But if it's just a matter of personal taste where you think something's too slow, then just drop it already. But a lot of people like to say, I threw the book at the wall, which I kind of wonder about, seeing as most likely it's an ebook. But anyway.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, well, if it was on their Kindle, they don't have a Kindle anymore.
Actually, you made me realize something, because I was thinking about that. Sometimes we do free giveaways of our books. And I understand, that's the thing. I think I can understand somebody wanting to go online to say, oh, I only got partially through this because I didn't like it, because they spent money on it. I mean, it's both the softcover version, whatever, and $14, $15, $18, $20, whatever it was. And, they spent money on it. But when you download it for free and you don't like it, I mean, what's your motivation to go out there and say,
right.
If you're not, maybe, I don't know. I really have to wonder about that, because I didn't consider that until you were saying that. But what if they downloaded it for free? What are you actually upset about?
It could be.
I get, it didn't cost you anything.
The case could be made, though, is that it costs them their time, right? It seems to me that is something that I've become aware of, is that to read a book, like to actually read every word and get through it and have it in your brain and form an opinion about it, that takes a certain amount of time and energy. And these days, when there's so many other things competing for the brain that wants to be entertained, the time that people are going to spend with some means of entertainment, then I guess you could say that even if they got the book for free, that take it in, digesting it and taking it in and all that sort of is a cost that people have to pay. And of course, time you never get back, right? So if you spent hours reading this crummy book, you feel like you've been hard done by, even if you only paid, $1 for it or got it for free.
See, I will stop. Well, even in movies, when I would go to movies, if I didn't like it, I'd get up and walk out. It's like, but that, I feel like I was cheated out of my, whatever I paid for it. But that's what it is. I don't want to waste the time. And so I'll just say, not my thing, right? I'll start reading. It may even be a decent book, but it's not my thing, and I'll just drop it, and go on to the next thing. So I don't invest all that time.
Okay, name a movie you walked out of.
It was a horrible movie from many, many years ago. I was a late teenager, so I was like 40 years or so. It was called Coming at You. It's one of those crummy 3D movies. But I did also walk out on just people, I'll get a sale for this one, but I walked out on Titanic. I hated it. I got up at some point. My friends were still there, and I said, you know what? I'll be out in the lobby reading or something. But I just found it irritating. Not the performances, but the storyline.
Yeah. The one movie I walked out of the theater in the middle of was Planes, Trains, and Automobiles.
Really?
Yeah, I know. There are a lot of people who love that movie, but
it's not your cup of tea.
No. So anyway.
I remember I walked out, or the whole group of us walked out of one, and I don't even remember the name of it. It was some sort of really awful horror thing, like physical horror.
Yeah.
That involved a lot of violent stuff and grotesque things, and that was just awful. And I mean, apart from that, that was it for the plot. So we figured we'd had it and didn't want to sit there and get grossed out, so we left.
How about you, Bertold?
Oh, have I walked out of a movie? Yes, Knight of Cups.
Yeah. Knight of what?
Cups.
It's a reference to the tarot cards. Yeah.
Sure.
It's sort of an art movie. It's
Okay.
not my thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I wanted to, are we done with the reviews and that stuff? Okay, I want to read a tweet that I saw this morning. I'm not going to identify who tweeted this. And I want to see what you guys think of this. The tweet is, writing brilliantly is no different than cooking, baking a succulent dish. If you take your time and do it just right, it's a masterpiece.
Well, maybe, but a couple of things occur to me right away. Is first of all, it takes a lot longer. That is, if you're writing,
That's true.
as
Yeah.
opposed to something really short. And second, the book kind of hangs around, whereas the dish, it either gets eaten if it's good, or if it isn't, it gets pitched out because it's not going to keep, and so it's more transient, the dish. Whereas a book kind of is it kind of sits there and demands to be read, or well, maybe not an ebook so much, but yeah, there is something to be said for that. I mean, both of these things require effort and can be appreciated either really well or kind of indifferently or choked down, just because out of politeness, that kind of thing. Yeah, sure. Yeah. In fact, I've compared writing to cooking at times. I'm sure other people have too.
Anybody else?
I'm going to say no because, to be fair, I'm not like a chef. I'm not a good cook at all, so I can't speak to that side of it. But it does seem to me with cooking, there's a recipe you can follow. And if you follow it well and follow the directions, you can be reasonably sure you'll come out with something that's at least decent, at least edible. I don't think there's really a formula. I mean, there are some formulas for writing, but I think if you followed that closely, you would just come up with an absolutely horribly boring book. That would be my take on it.
I actually sort of got the first impression first from the cooking side because I do a lot of cooking. So the first thing that hit me was, well, not necessarily true, because I know sometimes you could follow things exactly, but there are always there's variants you have little control over, the yeast and bread or whatever. There's a little bit of randomness in there that can ruin or make a dish. Well, maybe not ruin it completely, but again, bring it down with. Whereas I don't think that's the same in writing. I do understand what the author of the tweet was saying, because if you put that conscientious effort in, it's can only improve, put it that way. But I wouldn't say that it's the only factor. Another thing that hit me was with cooking, if you made me think of diligently following a recipe, and as we all know, there is no diligently followed recipe for writing. It can vary quite a bit. And even as a chef, you want to try to break out and try some things.
Yeah.
Succeed, so.
Yeah. I see. I think we probably all generally agree then, because when I saw the tweet and it comes with a picture of a piece of cake,
Mm.
and it says baking. And the thing to me is baking is a very, I don't know, you need to, unless you have years and years of experience and are trained to know the right ratios of the different ingredients to bake a cake, you have to follow a recipe. You can't just wing it when you're baking a cake or pastry. There are certain ratios of the ingredients that have to be combined to make a cake that comes out right, or a Danish, or whatever you want. And it just made me feel like it kind of goes back to the difference between a pantser and a plotter, that basically if you follow the recipe, you're going to have a brilliant piece of cake and a brilliant story. And that, just as others, is you guys have said, you don't really do that when you're writing. You don't necessarily follow a story. Yes, there are some parameters and guidelines if you're going to write in a particular genre, that this genre typically has these kinds of setups and endings and whatever. And but to just say it's the same, I just, like I said, it just kind of didn't seem quite right to me.
Well, I guess what you're saying is you can't pants a cake.
Yeah, that's right. You can't
Right.
pants the cake.
Right.
And as I keep admitting, I'm the ultimate pantser.
Yeah, I completely agree. When you're cooking, just cooking, you're making a stew or a soup or something, you have a lot of free way to go. And you keep tasting till you get it where you
Right,
want. You
right,
can't do
right.
that with a cake. You can't just
No.
poke it as it's baking. Yeah, you really have to watch the, what you're doing. There is some latitude, but not with the mechanics.
That's
Yeah.
true.
And I mean, generally when I cook, when people like it, well, I followed the recipe. So, but anyway.
But it's sort of like those rules too. It's like, you read all these rules about words you should use and shouldn't use, and you have to have active verbs, and you can't have all those crutch words, and if you have too many was's, then you're doing something wrong, and all this other stuff. That to me sounds almost like someone's trying to make a recipe for a book. And it's not quite that systematic, but I'm
Right.
wondering how many people treat it that way, and they kind of go off and obsess about some of this stuff and think if they just check all these boxes, the book will be perfect. Whereas maybe if they hadn't worried about that stuff so much, it might have actually been better. And so that's where the cooking analogy kind of breaks down a bit.
Yeah. I wish I could remember where I saw it or what the content was, but I just remember seeing something years ago about the 4 key pieces that every story needs to have, like I'm just going to make it up, the build up, the climax, the, whatever those. And I remember reading and thinking, that's never occurred to me. But you're right. I mean, there are some people, that's what they need to do. They need to check the box, or know what boxes need to be checked. And if they do all that box checking, then they will have a good story.
Mm-hmm. Well, that story structure thing, I wrote a blog post about it not too long ago, where there's these people with these graphs and all these labeled bits and pieces, and it seems to me the only way you can't, well, that was invented by people analyzing completed works.
Yeah.
Often classics. The English professor, they look at something by I don't know, Dickens or someone, and they'll say, oh yeah, here's the inciting incident, and here's the first crisis point, and here's
right.
and that's fine. And you can do that with your own stuff. Maybe when you're doing the second or subsequent draft, you can you have the whole thing there, and if you want it to meet some of these patterns, then you can go through. But when you're actually, unless you're a real super plotter, where you basically think all this stuff out and map it out before you ever start writing, and some do that, maybe successfully. But I don't know. I think that would take a lot of the fun out of it. It would make it turn into a kind of mechanical task, and I just assume not
Exactly.
bother.
Yeah.
I'd rather write something and then maybe discover those things in the text once it was complete.
Hmm. So, Richard, I'm not sure, did we ask you this last time? Because I think the other three of us, we've talked about this, but are you a pantser or a plotter?
Definitely pants and more. I mean, it's a, as in everything, it's a gradient, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I have a sense when I begin a book of where I'm going to begin and where I'm going to end, and how that journey, plotting the routes I'm taking, I have no idea until I get there. There have been times where I kind of have started, like I mentioned, this, especially in short story, with part of a scene, just something I think might capture a feeling, and I get that even on paper, but now I have to put that into a story of some kind. I mean, it's a cool little dialogue piece, or it's a visual, description, and now I have to build a story around it. So I've done that too. I've done, but there is, once I think I have a feel for that, when I start to line it out, then I start really thinking through more details. Like, since I do lean more to fantasy, I do a little bit of world building. Comedy gets me off the hook. I don't have to worry, because I can always say, well, how does this work? I just does for as a joke, So, but if you're thinking of magic or anything like that, you really may need to sit down and make sure there's some logical consistency. And then I start to, I really do. I separate out and do some heavy. I mean, right, it isn't as much fun. I'll also agree with that, but more towards the pantsing now.